You don't win arguments by speaking, you win by not needing to. Because every time you argue, you give something away. Your energy, your control, your emotional center. And Nietzsche knew this. He didn't teach you how to argue better. He taught you how to render arguments irrelevant, how to dominate without aggression, how to win without saying a word. Let me explain. Arguments are never really about truth. They're about power, about ego, about emotional leverage. When someone provokes you, especially in public, in front of others, or when emotions are high, they're rarely interested in understanding. They're baiting you into a performance. They want you to flinch. They want you to explain yourself. They want you to justify, clarify, defend, because the moment you do, the power shifts. Now you're no longer the observer. You're no longer grounded, centered, or in control. Now you're reacting. And the person who reacts is the person who is being led. They're writing the script, and you've stepped onto their stage without even realizing it. It doesn't matter if your argument is rational, correct, or even morally superior. Once you're explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you've already agreed to play their game, by their rules, on their terms. And that's how power is lost. People argue not to grow, but to win. And when winning is the goal, truth becomes irrelevant. Only domination matters. That's why the louder someone gets, the more aggressive their tone, the more desperate they are to appear right, even if they aren't. It's not logic. It's emotional theater. And if you step into that theater, you become part of the script they control. Every word you say now becomes ammunition. They'll twist it, cut it, misquote it. Not to find clarity, but to trap you deeper. The truly powerful person doesn't argue. They withdraw. They watch. They let the other unravel. They let silence speak louder than any defense ever could. Because silence forces the other person to confront their own noise. And few things are more terrifying than hearing your ego echo back at you. If someone says something cruel, stupid, or manipulative, and you calmly do nothing, say nothing, show nothing, you haven't lost. You've done something far more dangerous. You've left them alone with themselves. So remember, the person who provokes you wants to puppet your energy. They want to see you dance, shout, defend, and bleed emotional fuel into their fire. Don't give it to them. Stay still, stay silent, stay outside the theater, let them act, let them spiral, let them sweat in their monologue. Because in the end, the one who needs to argue already lost the moment they needed your reaction to feel powerful. And you walked away, undefeated, unreadable, unshaken. That's not a weakness, that's real dominance. Nietzsche once warned, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." What he meant was simple, but devastating. When you engage in petty conflict, when you argue with fools, when you step into chaos to prove a point, you don't just enter their world, you start to become it. You absorb their energy, you match their tone, you mirror their pettiness. And in doing so, you lose your edge, your clarity, your dignity, your power. Because arguments are rarely about truth. They're invitations to step down into someone else's emotional swamp. And the deeper you go, the more you resemble the very monster you were trying to defeat. That's why Nietzsche's real strategy wasn't confrontation. It was restraint, not silence as weakness, silence as superiority. Because a person who can stand still, hold calm eye contact, and smile quietly in the face of provocation is terrifying. Not because they're hiding fear, but because they're hiding nothing. They don't need to respond. They don't need to defend. They don't even need to be understood. Their presence alone creates an invisible pressure, a psychological tension that chokes the room. And here's where it gets fascinating. Silence in the face of provocation triggers something primal in the human brain. We expect a reaction. We crave resolution. When it doesn't come, the brain starts to panic. You're not being rude, you're being unreadable. And that confuses people. It unsettles them. Because now they're left alone with their thoughts, and their insecurity starts speaking louder than your silence ever could. They start to spiral. Did I go too far? Why isn't she defending herself? What does he know that I don't? Did I just reveal too much? The ego begins to collapse under the weight of ambiguity. You've said nothing, but now they're arguing with themselves. This is the essence of Nietzschean power. Not reaction, but reflection. Not dominance through force, but through emotional immunity. And make no mistake, this takes strength. It takes brutal self-control not to react. It takes confidence to remain composed when your pride is under attack. But when you do, you don't just win the moment, you win control over the entire frame. So next time someone tests you, mocks you, tries to provoke you into their chaos, don't step into their script. Don't flinch. Don't speak. Just pause, observe, and let silence do what words never could. Expose them, break them, defeat them, without ever touching them. Because the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't need to fight to win. Silence isn't absence. Silence is a weapon, cold, sharp, and invisible. Used correctly, it can collapse a conversation, dismantle resistance, and extract truth more effectively than any confrontation ever could. In high-stakes environments like interrogation rooms, diplomatic negotiations, and courtrooms, silence is trained like a martial art. Why? Because silence creates psychological pressure. It introduces tension, the kind that doesn't explode, but builds. When you go quiet, the other person suddenly hears something they weren't prepared for, the sound of their own thoughts. Most people don't know how to sit in that space. They fidget, they apologize, they rush to fill the void. Because to the untrained mind, silence equals judgment. Silence feels like rejection. It evokes the ancient fear of exile, the terror of being ignored, unheard, unseen, and the brain reacts accordingly. Research in group dynamics shows that the least talkative person in the room is often assumed to be the most powerful, not because they say brilliant things, but because they say so little. Silence is interpreted as confidence, as mastery, as emotional control. Even in animal hierarchies, it's the alpha that moves the least, reacts the least. The more reactive you are, the lower your perceived status. The calmer you remain, the more others adjust themselves around you. In hostage negotiations, silence is weaponized to cause suspects to speak, not through threats, but through the discomfort of unspoken tension. In therapy, skilled psychologists will use silence after a client makes a vague or evasive statement. The pause pushes the person to keep talking, and eventually, the truth slips out. In sales and business, the most effective negotiators will go completely quiet after making an offer. They won't justify, they won't chase, they just let the weight of the silence do the talking. And guess what? It works, because silence shifts the power. Now the other person is chasing you, for clarity, for comfort, for resolution. There's a reason mystery is so effective in psychology. The unknown triggers fear. Human beings are pattern-seeking machines. We are biologically wired to complete stories, to predict outcomes, to fill in the blanks. So when someone doesn't respond, when they stay quiet, still, unreadable, your brain doesn't relax. It panics. It starts asking, are they judging me? Are they angry? Do they know something I don't? Why didn't they say anything? And here's where the real power lies. While they spiral inward, you remain unmoved. You've already won, not through words, but through restraint. You didn't overpower them. You made them overpower themselves. Want to test this in real life? Next time someone insults you, challenges you, or tries to dominate a room, don't react. Don't correct them. Don't justify. Just pause, look at them, and say nothing. The silence will grow heavier with each second. You'll see the discomfort rise, and eventually they'll break, either by retreating, correcting themselves, or trying to explain what they really meant. Because silence isn't passive. It's active psychological disruption. Let me show you how people unknowingly trap themselves every time they open their mouth to defend their ego. Imagine someone throws a subtle insult at you in public. Why are you always so quiet? You think you're better than everyone else? This isn't curiosity. It's a power move. It's a social trap wrapped in sarcasm. What they want is for you to react, to defend, to explain, to prove something. And most people take the bait. They say something like, "No, I'm just introverted. I'm not trying to act superior or anything." And just like that, you've stepped into their frame. You're no longer grounded. You're no longer in control. You've shifted from sovereign to supplicant. You've allowed them to define the narrative, and now you're scrambling to reshape your image in their eyes, instead of standing rooted in your own presence. This is the trap of the verbal fighter. The moment you argue, you enter a position of defensive submission. You're no longer speaking to express. You're speaking to be accepted. And that's exactly what they wanted. But there's another path, one that radiates quiet dominance. You hold eye contact, you pause, and then you say absolutely nothing. You don't justify, you don't flinch, you don't even blink. And now something strange happens. Their words begin to echo, louder and more awkward with each passing second, because silence does something deadly. It reflects their own insecurity back at them. It exposes the neediness behind their jab, the desperation to control the social space. Suddenly, they're left alone with the weight of their own attempt at dominance, and it crumbles under its own insecurity. That's power. You've now done something no comeback ever could. You've shown them that their opinion is beneath your concern, that their projection isn't even worth the breath it would take to dismiss it. You haven't just rejected their frame, you've refused to step into it at all. And that's not just silence, that's psychological supremacy. Think of the truly powerful people you've met or seen. Do they argue over petty accusations? Do they rush to explain themselves to people beneath their values? No. They let their presence speak louder than any defense ever could, because they know. Every explanation is an admission that someone else's perception matters more than your own self-possession. So next time someone throws a verbal hook at you, don't swing back. Just look at them, pause, smile maybe, or not. Let their words fall flat. Let them feel the emptiness of their own performance. Because silence in that moment isn't passive. It's the loudest refusal in the room. And those who master that don't fight to win. They win because they never fought. Nietzsche never argued to win, because to him arguing meant you were still inside the game, still seeking approval, validation, or consensus. He didn't want to win debates. He wanted to burn down the illusion that truth could ever be found in them. His goal wasn't to defeat your opinion. His goal was to reveal that your opinion is a defense mechanism, a fragile shell protecting your carefully constructed identity. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. Why? Because a lie can be corrected, but a conviction is glued to your ego. It becomes part of who you are. And once that happens, truth is no longer welcome. It becomes a threat. This is why most people don't want clarity. They want protection. They don't debate you to learn. They debate you to preserve themselves, to reinforce the mask, the role, the image they've spent a lifetime curating. Try to reason with someone whose identity is built on being the smart one, or the spiritual one, or the victim, or the morally superior. And watch how quickly truth becomes the enemy. Because if what you say challenges what they believe, you're not just attacking an idea, you're threatening who they think they are. And that's when logic dies. That's when defense becomes aggression. That's when people stop hearing you and start preparing their next attack. But Nietzsche knew something most people never learn. You don't destroy an ego by fighting it. You destroy it by refusing to feed it. Walk away, say nothing, smile, pause, let the tension build. Let their need to be right consume them. Let them tremble in the face of your indifference. Because nothing enrages an insecure person more than the realization that you don't need their approval to exist. They shout, you stay still. They accuse, you blink once. They twist your silence into arrogance, because they can't stand that your self-worth isn't tied to their validation. That's what Nietzsche understood better than any philosopher of power. The real battle is never external. It's not between your mind and theirs. It's between your stillness and their need to be acknowledged. Because when someone realizes they can't control you, can't provoke you, can't pull you into their ego drama, they crumble. Not in public, but internally, where their pride lives. And that's where all real battles are won. So don't try to convince the ego it's wrong. Don't drag truth into an arena built to reject it. Don't try to fix people who confuse clarity with attack. Instead, rise above the entire frame. Because when you refuse to argue, when you stay rooted in your truth without demanding agreement, you don't just win the argument. You show them there was never anything to argue about in the first place. Because power isn't about having the last word. It's about not needing to say anything at all. Powerful men are not defined by how loudly they speak, but by how little they need to. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of Rome, ruled during a time of turbulence, betrayal, and political corruption. His reforms, meant to restore discipline, justice, and stoic virtue, threatened the comfort of the Senate's corrupt elite. They mocked him. They resisted him. They whispered behind his back and challenged his vision. And yet, Marcus did not argue. He didn't storm into the Senate with fury. He didn't retaliate with verbal swords. He didn't lower himself into the mud of petty politics. He simply listened, paused, and replied with words that cut deeper than any insult. Let us see what time reveals. This wasn't evasion. It was mastery. Because Marcus understood a law that few ever learn. Reaction is submission. The moment you react, you acknowledge the noise as worthy of your energy. You admit that the jab, the insult, the resistance mattered enough to pull you off your throne. But silence? Silence is sovereign. It makes people question themselves. By saying less, Marcus said more. By doing less, he dominated more. He knew what every master strategist knows. Time destroys lies. Time silences pretenders. Time humiliates the loud. Let them shout. Let them resist. Let them burn their fuel. He waited. He watched. And over time, the truth of his vision stood while theirs crumbled into dust. This is the power of the silent strategic observer. They do not flinch. They do not debate. They simply plant the seed and let time expose who was real and who was performative. In a world addicted to speed and reaction, Marcus Aurelius reminds us, sometimes the most dominant move is to do nothing at all, and let the future settle the argument for you. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who doesn't need to speak to be understood. They don't chase, they don't defend, they don't perform, because they know something most never learn. Control isn't about how much you say, it's about how little you need to. If you want to outsmart someone, not by winning their game, but by refusing to play it, here's how. Don't react, observe. Most people expose themselves when they feel heard, but they reveal themselves when they feel ignored. When someone tries to provoke you, it's rarely about truth, it's about power. They want you to react so they can watch your self-control evaporate. But if you remain calm, emotionally still, simply watching, they begin to leak. Their posture changes, their tone cracks, their words get louder and less coherent. Because in that silence, they meet themselves. And most people aren't ready for that. Use silence like a mirror. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening, it means everything is happening inside them. Humans are wired to fear ambiguity. We crave feedback, reaction, confirmation. So when you give them nothing, their mind starts spinning. Are they judging me? Do they think I'm wrong? What are they thinking? They begin projecting, filling the silence with their own fears, doubts, and desires. You didn't say a word, but you let them confess everything by doing nothing. Smile slightly, not a grin, not sarcasm, just the slightest curl of confidence, like a shadow of a smirk. This subtle, controlled smile says, I know what you're doing. I'm not moved. I'm already 3 steps ahead. That one facial cue can unravel the insecure mind. Because they're not just fighting your words anymore, they're now battling their own uncertainty. In body language psychology, a slight smile in silence is often perceived as either alpha confidence or unreadable threat. Either way, you've taken the upper ground. Keep your body still. Stillness is the language of certainty. When you fidget, you leak anxiety. When you shift too often, you signal uncertainty. But when you hold your posture, spine straight, hands calm, breathing slow, you radiate presence. And presence dominates noise. In elite military training and high-stakes negotiations, stillness is taught as a form of psychological pressure. The calmest person sets the emotional tone, and everyone else begins to mirror it. Never explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. This is the trap most fall into, the compulsion to clarify, justify, or convince. But if someone is arguing not to understand, but to be right, you're not having a conversation. You're playing in an emotional arena rigged for ego warfare. And the moment you try to make them see, you've already agreed to fight for their approval. Why would a lion explain itself to a sheep that's already decided it's dangerous? You don't win by being understood. You win by being undisturbed. Walk away. Let them stay lost in their frame. Let your silence be the only answer. Arguing is a trap. Verbal combat may feel good to the ego, but it weakens your aura, drains your energy, and invites chaos. Nietzsche's wisdom isn't about being the loudest. It's about being so centered, so unbothered, that others become uncomfortable in your silence. Because in a world addicted to noise, the one who speaks least becomes the one everyone listens to, even when he says nothing. Don't argue. Observe. Don't fight. Outlast. Don't explain. Transcend. That's how you win, without saying a word.